2 blocks north of the historic Black Archives and Lyric Theater was a home at 159 Northwest 10th Street. The home is no longer there. It has been replaced by an apartment complex. But in the heyday of Overtown, the family of Samuel David Johnson and his wife, Ida Ellen Roberts, lived here. The couple raised 7 children in this home, 7 children who finished high school and college before the Second World War, 7 children who became teachers in Miami-Dade County, and doctors, and a judge. This is the family of Dr. Dorothy Jenkins Fields, historian and founder of the Black Archives and historic Lyric Theater. The Johnsons demonstrated an example of how a community that was given so little rose up against the odds to accomplish so much that they shaped their community with their contributions. Samuel David Johnson and Ida Ellen Roberts married in Harbor Island, Bahamas, before migrating to Key West before the turn of the 20th century.
There were 7 children to my grandparents.
Samuel Jr. and Elaine were born in Key West. By 1903, they moved to Miami, where their 3rd child, Roberta, was born. Frederick followed in 1907. The 5th child, Dorothy, was born in 1909. James and John followed in 1910 and 1913. In the early 1900s, blacks in Miami carried on with their daily lives, working and building their community despite the setbacks. Samuel Sr. worked on the grounds of the Vizcaya estate and also worked as a handyman for William Jennings Bryan. Ida worked as a washerwoman and a seamstress.
My grandmother in the Bahamas was Episcopalian, and my grandfather was Wesleyan. When they got to Key West, they attended the Episcopal Church. And I understand my grandfather was very unhappy. He wanted to be Methodist. He wanted to be a part of the Wesleyan Church. And they moved to Miami in 1903, and there was no established church, Wesleyan church at that time. And he thought that St. Agnes was too far to walk. So they joined Mount Zion Baptist Church, which was just a few blocks from where we lived. Blacks did not wait for the state or the county or the city to establish schools for them. They started their own schools in their own homes. Children in kindergarten, starting with Miss Anderson. I used to always hear Dorothy Graham talk about Miss Anderson's school. And one of the teachers, Miss Anderson, many of the children went to her, and some that you might have heard of. Lena Horne, the actress, was a frequent visitor to Miami growing up, and whoever it was that she lived with sent her to Miss Anderson's school along with Garth Reeves and Athley Range. Mrs. Range often talked about Lena Horne being in her class. The reason we have historically black colleges and universities is because they started with high school departments. They started with high school departments because the white structure in most of the southern states and municipalities would not allow black children to go to school. We need to understand that a bit. So at any rate, when you finished 8th grade in Miami before, say, 1925, 26, if your parents wanted you to be educated further, you would have to go away. And so my grandmother, who was a washerwoman, who was a seamstress, was determined that those children were going to school. My grandparents were members of Mount Zion Baptist Church, and my grandmother knew about the Florida Baptist Academy that was in Jacksonville, and she was able to send the first child, Sammy, at age 13 to Jacksonville to the Florida Baptist Academy. Then went to FAMC, and it was Mrs. Williams Jennings Bryant. It was Mrs. Bryant who gave my uncle Sammy the overcoat to take to Jacksonville to the Florida Baptist Academy. She gave him clothes from her children to take to high school. And she could see that the fact that this mother was sending these children away to school was important. So the first 4 children went away to high school. Florida Baptist Academy, Florida A&M, which was a college at the time, Spelman, and Tuskegee. And my Aunt Roberta, who went to Tuskegee, was on campus with George Washington Carver. The Florida Baptist Academy later moved to Live Oak, St. Augustine, and now has relocated as the Florida Memorial University in Miami Gardens. So I knew that my Aunt Elaine finished high school at Florida A&M at the college. What I did not know until sometime later, in fact, I was preparing for my 50th anniversary as a graduate of Spelman, was that my Aunt Elizabeth Jenkins Morrison, my father's aunt, graduated from Spelman in 1914.
After much pleading with the white establishment, colored children were finally able to attend high school up to the 12th grade in Miami, when the new Booker T. Washington School opened on February 28, 1927. Dorothy and J.K. Johnson were in the second graduating class. Sammy, the first of the Johnson children to finish high school, went on to study pre-medical training at Morehouse College in Atlanta in 1919. He eventually earned his medical degree from Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee in 1930. He returned home to Miami to practice medicine.
As far as medicine is concerned, and my uncle, Dr. S.H. Johnson, the radiologist, he became a radiologist because when he graduated from Meharry and returned to Miami, his office was in my grandfather's house in the living room. That's where he saw his patients. And so he had one patient who had a broken kneecap. So Uncle Sammy had a coupe, a little car. He took the patient to Jackson Memorial Hospital, the Alamo, the pink building on the campus. That was the entire hospital, and it was called the Alamo. Everything that you see around that building now was woods, trees and alligators and whatever. And that one building was all for blacks and whites. And blacks, of course, had a special section. And black people had to sit outside to wait to be called, blacks and the Indians, because my uncle said the Indians were out there with them too. And then there was a little shanty, a little shack that they had for the blacks and Indians. So my Uncle Sammy, Dr. S.H. Johnson, sat, he said, for about 12 hours, waiting to be called with this patient. And finally, when patient was called and Uncle Sammy walked the patient to the door, they said, "You can't come in." My uncle said, "I am a board certified medical doctor. You're black, you cannot come in." So they would not let him in. So he waited for the patient to be x-rayed, and then Uncle Sammy asked for a copy of the x-ray, and they said, "We will mail it to you." Now, we lived 159 Northwest 10th Street. Jackson Memorial is on 12th Avenue and 14th Street. It took, he said, over a week for him to get it. So all that time, he could not treat the patient until he knew what the problem was. That man stayed in pain all that time. Those are the kinds of situations where people could have been kind, just kindness, and they were not. And so he was so enraged about that he decided to save his money and to go to Cook County Hospital and become a radiologist. And he did. Closed his office, went to Cook County Hospital, was there for a year, came back and built his own clinic and practiced. And so the picture of Thurgood Marshall with Garth Reeves and my Uncle John are in that office. In fact, all of Uncle Sammy's brothers started their careers in that office. Also, his nephews, Ken, Dr. J.K. Johnson Jr., who later became a dentist, and Leo Adderley, who later became a county court judge.
Leo's mother and second Johnson child, Elaine, attended high school at Spelman College in Atlanta. She earned her teaching certificate and returned to Miami. Elaine married Alfonso Adderley in 1936. Their son was born 3 years later. Elaine pioneered early education for children when she incorporated child care into the curriculum of Booker T. Washington High School in 1941. The students taking the course would get on-the-job training in a small nursery school which was housed on the school's campus. Elaine dreamed up the idea out of the need to have someone care for her young son Leo. Leo followed in his Uncle John's footsteps by becoming a judge in Miami-Dade County. The third child, Roberta, went to high school in Tuskegee, Alabama.
My Aunt Roberta, I understand, they had to take her to Tuskegee. They had to put her on the train. They were afraid to send her because she was so rambunctious that they figured that she might jump off at any point and run away. So he actually rode on the train to take Aunt Bert to Tuskegee for high school. Fast forward many years ago, when she celebrated her 60th anniversary, she asked me to take her, and I was proud to do so.
Roberta earned her bachelor's degree in education from Florida A&M University. She taught in the Miami-Dade school system for 39 years, first as a teacher at Phyllis Wheatley Elementary Schools, then at Alapata Elementary Schools.
At Phyllis Wheatley Elementary School, my father's cousin, Grace Albert, was the principal. Third grade teacher was my Aunt Johnna Lee Dennis Johnson. Fifth grade teacher was my aunt, my mother's sister, Roberta Thompson, and the physical education teacher was my mother, Dorothy Jenkins Johnson McKellar.
The fourth Johnson child, Frederick, attended high school at Morehouse Academy, then continued on to Morehouse College, where he earned his teaching certificate. In 1932, Fred returned to Miami to be principal of the all-black Perrine Elementary School. He was met in the parking lot one night by the Ku Klux Klan and told not to return. Fred complied with their request. He spent the next few years teaching at Booker T. Washington High School before returning to college to earn his master's degree. Since most Florida colleges did not accept blacks, he was forced to go out of state to New York University. Fred returned to Miami and still could not get a job.
Uncle Fred, he was an accountant and he wanted to become a CPA. He went to NYU and did all the coursework, but was not able to, but after the coursework you had to do an internship, and he could not get a CPA in Miami. No white CPA, there were no black ones, would give him an internship. So he became a teacher at Dorsey and then Northwestern. He was the accountant at Liberty Square Projects. Liberty Square Projects was the second public housing project built in America. And James E. Scott was the person assigned to it. It was designed in such a way that it was architecturally significant with the design and with the gardens that every family had and all of the amenities. And it was so beautiful that those black people who were teachers and doctors and had means built homes right next to it, right across the street. And so there were big, beautiful two-story homes like the Chapman House across the street from Liberty Square Projects. I'm a product of Dorothy Catherine Jenkins Johnson McKellar and Melvin Adolph Jenkins. My father was born in Homestead, Florida. His family came from Micanopy, and before that from South Carolina. My mother was born at 159 Northwest 10th Street in Miami's Colored Town, my grandparents' property, just 2 blocks north of the Lyric Theater. I was born New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1942, Christian Hospital in Miami, Florida, in Miami's Colored Town. And I have heard recently from my cousin, Dolores, who lives in Tampa, who is about 15 years older than I am, that because it was New Year's Eve, my uncles, especially the 2 doctors, were hoping that I would wait and be born the next day so that I could be the first baby born in Miami. Of course, I have never been known to take directions, and so I came at my own time, which was the afternoon of Thursday, December 31st, 1942.
James Kenneth graduated from Booker T. Washington High School, then attended Florida A&M College, then Meharry Medical College. He was drafted into the Army and rose to the rank of captain as one of the famed Buffalo Soldiers. J.K. returned to Miami and opened private practice in Overtown, then Liberty City, where he served the community for more than 40 years. The last Johnson child, John Davis, graduated from Booker T. Washington High School in 1931. He earned his bachelor's degree from West Virginia State College and his law degree from Harvard Law School. John became the second black judge in the city of Miami in 1955 and the fourth in the state of Florida. John helped to knock down social and racial barriers in Miami and was also a community architect who helped to develop and establish social programs in the city of Miami.
Because my grandparents had these 7 children, which we understand was the only family, black or white, to have as many children who were educated through high school and college and professional school. When they were growing up, I guess because they were the way they were being raised, they got to play with the children of Bill Sawyer, so that my mother, her brothers, John and Ken, grew up with the Sawyer children, and my Uncle John, the lawyer, worked with Gwen Sawyer Cherry, who became the first black woman lawyer in Miami. When she was in high school, he was her civics teacher. One of the things Mrs. Jennings gave my grandfather was a book called The Store Boy. It tells the story of a boy who was tattered and torn, but grew up to be a millionaire. And I believe that that book, along with my grandmother's encouragement, really made an impression on my uncle. And he wanted to see to it that all 7 finished high school and college. My point in saying all of that was that education was so very important to my grandmother, like many others, but she saw to it that those children, 7 of them, my Lord, sometimes they had to stay out. It took them the 7 of them, over 30 years to finish. They had to stay out. There were no grants, and so they'd have to get out and work. My Uncle Sammy, the radiologist, was a roofer. He was a longshoreman. Anything that he had to do to work to help the others and to help himself through college. I spent my first 6 years in Overtown, living my grandparents' property, and they had built 3 houses in that area. And then in August of 1948, my uncle, Dr. S.H. Johnson, the radiologist, moved the entire family to Brown Sub, now known as Brownsville. He bought and made available to us 3/4 of a city block, 29th Avenue to 29th Court, and the north 54th Street. And we lived there, I lived there from August of 1948 until March of 2020. We were our own neighbors. There were 7 children to my grandparents, and all 7 lived in that block with a courtyard in the middle and a fish pond, so that when we had guests like Thurgood Marshall, who was a graduate of Howard University Law School, about 3 years before my Uncle John, when he came to visit, when Dr. Mordecai Johnson, the president of Howard University, would come, when celebrities would come, they would all be entertained in our yard. Growing up, I'm an only child, and although I had cousins around, at night, you go home, weekends you're alone. I used to pray that I would be able to tell the story of my mother and her brothers and sisters, because I never felt that I was smart enough to do any of the things that they were doing. I could never be a teacher. I could never be a real estate person. I could never be a doctor. I could never be a lawyer. I certainly could not be a judge. I wasn't smart enough to do any of that. So I wanted to learn, I wanted to tell their stories.